You know, as you may very well know, back in the 1960s, they took prayer out of school. And, you know, I must admit that it seems rather, or at least for the majority of my adult life, up until this very moment now today, you know, taking prayer out of school seemed like, you know, neither here nor there. I cannot say that I thought that it mattered. I cannot say that I thought that it was significant. And, you know, come to find out that there's a little more to it than what meets the eye, as is the case with these things, right? There's a little more to it. So the complaint had been that you would hear oftentimes from old timers, right? Old school Christians, they would be like, yeah, the problem in America is they took prayer out of the schools. You know, and like I'm Generation X, and I'm like, yeah. What does that even mean? You know, why does prayer need to be in school? Like, school is where you learn math and stuff, right? So it did not seem to matter. I did not think that it mattered. But here's the deal, is the prayer that was under scrutiny, I forget the name of the court case, but there was this lady who was brought this all the way to the Supreme Court. And the prayer was very much akin to the Pledge of Allegiance, in the sense that the Pledge of Allegiance talks about one nation under God, right? And so the prayer that was prayed voluntarily, and I don't even know if they did it in all schools, but schools would do it. And it was a kind of an acknowledgement that there indeed is a creator, there is a God, and that the prayer gave thanks to this generic, unnamed God, religiously unaffiliated God, right? The prayer gave thanks to this generic, religiously unaffiliated God, and sought this deity for wisdom and help. It was a short, simple, sweet, formal, school-type prayer. This was the prayer. So, you know, if anyone thinks that they were praying to Jesus in the classroom, that's not what was going on. Or if they were praying in Jesus' name in the classroom, that's not what was going on. It was nothing of the sort. It was just an acknowledging that there is a God and thanking God for all that we have. You know, no harm in that, right? Can't be all that bad. So here's the beef, that this lady was so deeply offended that her atheistic propensities, she felt, were under attack, that this was unfair. You know, but the fact is that the prayer was voluntary. You didn't have to pray it. You didn't have to participate in it. But here's the thing. This prayer, the justification by the Supreme Court for kicking this prayer to the curb was the idea of the separation of church and state. And the problem is that the vast swaths of Americans in the 1960s did not have a problem with this prayer in school, right? People didn't have a problem with it. Society, the culture in the day did not have a problem with it. And yet the Supreme Court found themselves with some cryptic argument, some logic to do with the separation of church and state. And they said, oh, yada, yada, the separation of church and state. You can't have prayer in school. And what this unleashed, and this is really the deeper issue, is it weaponized the idea of the separation of church and state. Because prior to the 1960s, separation of church and state really boiled down to, like, it's none of the state's business what you do with your religion, right? Whatever religion you choose to practice is on you. That's your choice. It's not the state to certify. It's not the state to choose. There is to be no state, no formal religion that the state will honor, right? No state sponsored, if you will. And that's really where this idea of the separation is born of. But the Supreme Court decided to take it a step further and say that you couldn't pray in school. Well, herein is the problem. This is what originated from this, is the sense that nothing to do with that religion is off out of bounds. You know, my daughter, who's now graduated, but she told me that I didn't know this at the time, but she had brought in a Bible to middle school. So she would have been like in 8th grade. And she was sitting in the library reading her Bible. And the librarian came up to her and told her she couldn't have that in school. She couldn't do that here. And my daughter, not knowing any better, she's like, oh, I'm sorry. And she put her Bible away and never brought it to school again because she didn't know. And she never said anything about it. You know, but here is this idea of the separation of church and state become weaponized in our culture, where now somehow, and of course, if she was reading the Bhagavad Gita, if she was reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead, if she was reading some other religious book, I am positive, and I know so are you, that librarian would have said nothing as regards her choice of literature, right? They would have said nothing. But when the Christian Bible gets pulled out, it's like, oh, separation of church and state, can't have that here. So here's my point, man, is that the Supreme Court got out over its skis in the 1960s, as unfortunately it seems that they are accustomed to do, and ruled in a way that had made sweeping changes across the nation. Not according to the will of the people. These unelected Supreme Court justices decided that you can't have a Bible in school. Decided there's this divide in the culture, the separation. And here's the issue, that what this has amounted to is that there is history, American history, that is ripe with Christianity. The motivations of the abolitionist movement in the 17 and 1800s, not just the 1800s. You know, people think the abolition movement was just before the Civil War. You know, some free blacks were organizing. The abolition movement goes all the way back to like the 1770s, and Christians, the Quakers and other Christian groups, were preaching against it in the pulpit. They were preaching against slavery in the pulpit and saying it was a sin to hold slaves. And they began to organize, and they began to push the culture and work against this colonial economic system that the new Americas had inherited from their despotic parents, Great Britain and Portugal and Spain, right? And the Christians pushed against this. The Christians pushed, not only did the Christians push against slavery, the Christians pushed against the despotism of the crown. Christians found and offered encouragement towards the Revolutionary War. Think of it, man. Christians were preaching in all quarter of the colonies, you know, that freedom was the will of God. To oppose tyranny was the will of God. And there's a lot to be gone into herein. There, you could build full documentaries, series of documentaries on all of this, and all of this history, and all of this rich American history is thrown under the bus because the motivations of the people, of the historical events, were motivated by Christian beliefs, Christian teachings, Christian preaching, Christian voices, right? The voice of Christians was part of history, and that history cannot be talked about in the classroom because the separation of church and state. Setting a portal. So, you know, it would seem a difficult thing that has arisen in our culture, in my lifetime, in the last 50 years. This idea that certain subject matter is off bounds, that certain subject matter cannot be discussed, that certain subject matter cannot be presented in a positive light. That the only Christianity that can be talked about in the classroom is the Christianity of the Crusades. And even at that, the Crusades are made to be some big deal, as though this was some great effect of the Christian church, right? As though the 4 Crusades that happened are in somehow comparison to the hundreds and hundreds of jihads that the Muslim world participated in the last 1,000 years. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. You know, it's there's not even a comparison there. But needless to say, that's not even my point to compare religions. That's not my point. My point is to say that there is a history that is unsung in the classroom. There is a history that is unsung. There is a history. The civil rights movement was born up of Christians. Christian faith, Christian teachers, Christian preachers, Christian ideals. A Christian worldview was antithetical to the Jim Crow laws of the Dixiecrat South. And yet this subject matter is off bounds today. It is censored speech because of the holy cow of the separation of church and state. You know what? I think it's high time that we tear down the separating wall, man, because it's not done us good. God bless. Stay true.